Off the N2 between Riversdale and Mossel Bay, this fishing and farming community offers great angling off the rocks, a blue flag beach and more. But first, we headed upriver to reveal the quieter gems to be discovered.
The lovely seaside village of Stilbaai is a popular holiday destination here on the Garden Route. The town is divided into east and west by the Khoisan River and plays an important part in the lives of all the locals. What better way to get to know the area than to start right here?
Warren Matthews runs an indigenous nursery and landscaping business and supports the town's conservation drive. It's led to an ecosystem teeming with fish like grunter, steenbras and cob, and a rich bird life of cranes, kingfishers and egrets.
Well, the Marine Reserve was declared in 2008, and the Khoisan River is the first estuary to be included in a Marine Reserve in the Western Cape. It's had a huge influence on the river, obviously for the fish populations. Yeah, it's just really has made a major improvement to the estuary.
All along the river, there are working farms, so the thick bush of the reserve offers sanctuary to indigenous buck.
It really is so beautiful out here.
We're just arriving in the Khoisan. The story goes that along many moons ago, when it was very low tide, or there's a lot of fresh water that had come from the catchment area, that the hippos that were living just further up in the river would come down and use this area to bathe.
Heading upriver, about 15 kilometers of the Hoku is navigable by boat. Or if you fancy a workout, then this is ideal stand-up paddleboarding country. While many visitors choose to stay along the beach or in fishermen's cottages in town, we opted for the peace and quiet of self-catering Stonehaven River Lodge. There are guest houses on other farms, but the River Lodge is for those who love having the place exclusively to themselves. Around 3,000 years ago, the Khoisan were the only inhabitants, along with an Indian Ocean full of fish. Noticing how some of these got trapped in small tidal pools, the local hunter-gatherers built a series of low walls in a half-moon shape. This ingenious tradition of getting your catch to come to you is one Andre Roux helps to preserve.
What's happening here, when the tide comes in, it goes over the walls. The fish swims into the tidal pool. Then the fish gets trapped when the tide goes out again. The people come in and we catch the fish inside the tidal pools.
And how are you involved?
Yeah, I became involved in the fish traps when I was young. My father bought a holiday house in the 1960s, and I came with him to the fish traps. He was involved as a fisherman with the local people, and he taught me how to fish and how to build them and maintain the fish traps. That's how it began. And then afterwards, the past few years, I was also involved with a new model of cooperation with the Cape Nature structure.
What makes them so unique?
This is the only one at the moment being preserved and maintained and worked. And this is the only one that is the best preserved of all the other 30.
Other freshwater inhabitants of Stilbaai live on the grounds of the Tourism Bureau. Here, Leslie Guy Ferguson looks after a community of eels.
I believe the pond is home to some very unusual residents.
Yes, we have the eels in our ponds here in Stilbaai, which are fed on a daily routine every morning at roughly about 11 o'clock. And they are the family Anguilla mozambica. So they do go to the sea to go and spawn, but they do return again. And they do go through a body change before they go to the sea. The body gets a bit fatter, the facial features change, and the eyes also seem to narrow a bit. They are usually roughly around about 25 to 30 years when they leave this pool, and they go to the sea, to the east side of Madagascar to go and spawn. The small eels are glass eels, they return back, but when he reaches this pool, he's almost 5 to 6 years old.
When did you start feeding the eels?
The children discovered them in 1809 when this farmhouse was built. They used the fountain for their house, and we understand that the knowledge that has been passed down to us from generations to generations said that the children had discovered the eels and were feeding them already that time.
Mindful of the delicate ecosystem is a business which makes the most of the fynbos, treads lightly on the earth, and has a footprint in 15 countries. Inverroche is the first handcrafted fynbos gin distillery in South Africa, using rare botanicals which grow nowhere else on the planet. It's a family business started by the intrepid Lorna Scott.
Lorna, tell me about the distillery and how it came to be.
I have a marketing background, but I first needed to discover, how I could use these ingredients that were used by our ancestors for the longest time. And the fynbos, of course, was the critical factor. And so to find a way to capture that and to be able to put it into a world-class product that we could then share with the world was where the thinking started. And ultimately it ended up being a world-class gin as we have now.
The fynbos ingredients don't surrender their aroma easily.
Lorna, how does the distillation process work?
When we started with the sort of discovery of how we can use these different botanicals, a number of the more delicate ones, in particular the floral fynbos, tended to lose a lot of their particularly aromatic components if you distilled it in the traditional way, which means that you immerse everything into your base spirit and it literally gets boiled. So I had the inspiration one day and I was cooking Sunday lunch and I happened to be steaming some broccoli in my little colander. And I looked at this little colander and I had a light bulb moment. So I threw the broccoli out and took the colander and I put the floral botanicals into the colander and put it into the pot still and steamed it. And so that's exactly what we now do. And we then do also a secondary infusion, but that in essence is how our distillation is different from others.
The local water and floral kingdom make these export gins what they are. So Lorna insists that production is as eco-friendly as possible.
At the base of our philosophy is an element of having to respect the environment. We are custodians of this unique space. When we distill, there's always vinasse or a back set that remains after we've taken out the heart and the beautiful stuff that ends up in your bottle. But the waste, we had a challenge. What do we do with this? So we've got an abundance of limestone sand around the distillery. And so what we do is we take the vinasse, which is a liquid, quite thick liquid, and we then mix this with the limestone and we pour this into molds and we leave it in the sun to dry for several months. But this is an example of one of them. So these are sun-dried bricks. There's no energy involved whatsoever. And we use them to pave around the distillery. We make paths, etc., and even in front of the hearth.
Well, they say the proof is in the pudding, so I think it's time to do the tasting.
They use fynbos from the limestone-rich soil of the lowlands and the surrounding mountains, or from the coastline and dunes around Stilbaai.
So we have the classic, the Verdant and the amber, and so I'd like you just to pick up your glass of classic, twirl it around a little bit, just shake it, and then just put it under your nose. You'll find that those delicate flavors just suddenly emerge and the aromas hit your nose. And then the way to taste this, because it's neat, it's very strong, so you've got to be very careful. Just a tiny, tiny little drop. Take it into your mouth, roll it around your tongue, and suddenly you'll find that the beautiful buchus come right through in the middle of your mouth.
It's crispy but yet smooth.
And there's a wonderful sharp citrus that just sits on the sides of the tongue, very definitive of the limestone fynbos.
In a market dominated by established brands, this African gin competes with daring and innovation.
Let's see how you experience the amber. Now, of course, this is our best seller, and I think part of the reason for this is that they're so very unusual. These little guys are not just extraordinary because they are full of rich, sort of sour and sweet flavors, but it has tannins in the husk, which gives it this softer and yet woodiness that you would expect from an aged whiskey or a brandy.
I wasn't expecting this. This is like nothing I've tasted before. It's like an explosion of honey divine.
Thank you.
Together with her children, Lorna's created a global brand, exporting to Europe, Australia and the US, and she's done it in just 6 years.